Hey, great to have you here. So in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the movie called Carry On. So this is a movie I think I'd seen some advertisements for, but just jumped on Netflix and saw that this was promoted at the top of my list. And instead of watching something that I have tagged as far as stuff I want to watch in the future, I was like, you know what? We'll just throw this on, see what it's like. It's the Christmas holiday season. This is a Christmas related movie, so why not give it a shot? So jumped into this one, and for this review, I'm going to be giving a high-level overview of the movie, not going into spoilers, giving a score, and then jumping into spoilers. So if you don't have anything spoiled, definitely listen through my review score, and then from there, depending on your preference on hearing spoilers, we'll be jumping into that. So starting things off, as I said, just at a high level, this movie definitely came across as being an attempt at somewhat of like a Die Hard, where it's an action, thrillery movie with a Christmas element thrown into it. So somewhat of that feels somewhat almost like an Air Force One also, where you're obviously involving like an airport and airplanes and things like that. Just an action-related film taking place at the airport during the holiday seasons. As far as kind of the main points I want to highlight, starting with characters, I think characters were overall relatively strong. There's a lot of well-known names that you see more in subtle references here and there, like Dean Norris from Breaking Bad is one. I always just think of him as Hank, but you have Hank in this. You have the main recognizable name, Jason Bateman. It's kind of weird how they introduce him. You have him with like shots from the back of his head and speaking for a large portion of the first like 20 minutes or so, but you don't ever actually see his face. And it's like, we know this is Jason Bateman. I don't know what you're trying to hide at this point, but it was a little strange. Maybe he was trying to pitch it as somewhat of a mysterious character. Maybe that's what they were going for. It definitely was effective at doing that, but he's obviously the well-known actor in this movie. You also have Taron Egerton, who's kind of an up-and-coming character. I think he was in like the Kingsman maybe before in that whole franchise. Decent cast overall, it felt like going into this. And there's, as I said, there's some others that you probably recognize from other things here and there, but relatively strong. I will say one critique that I'll get into in the spoilers a little bit more in depth is that it felt like maybe because Jason Bateman is the big name, the one I know and the one I enjoy a lot of his movies. I think he's a great actor. It felt like he's the villain in this movie and I'm wanting him to succeed. So it felt like more often than not, I was cheering for the bad team or the bad guys in this movie more than our protagonists, which probably isn't necessarily what you want, especially when you're trying to heavily push this action hero type situation, similar to Die Hard, where you have Bruce Willis kind of carrying the torch. I felt like in this one, more often than not, maybe it's just me personally, I was cheering for the villain characters, but decent characters overall, beyond the evil ones being a little bit stronger, in my opinion. Getting into the plot, so at a high level, this is a situation where you're at an airport and you have your lead, Ethan, who's being played by Taron Egerton, and he is working TSA, and he is kind of thrown into this situation where almost feels a little bit like Phone Booth, if you've seen that movie with Colin Farrell. Great movie, at least I thought so back when I saw it. Similar situation here where he's being talked through his ear by this villain, by Jason Bateman, and he's being told to do certain things. He says, hey, let this through. So he's working TSA at the booth there. He's pretty much being told, let this stuff through here and don't flag it as being a problem, essentially, and everything will be okay for you. And it does a good job as far as setting up that premise and building suspense with that. I feel like there's some times here and there where our suspension of disbelief has to be like thrown out the window because it's a little bit silly and unbelievable that all the coincidences wind up happening, but it is an action film, so I realize some of that is expected, and you just kind of deal with that at times. So, but I feel like the premise, the concept of the film, he says he's not a terrorist, but the people that are pretty much attacking the airport in the situation feels like it's a good premise as far as building suspense. It's like, okay, how are you going to handle this? We have times where Ethan resolves one thing, but then another problem arises. So definitely has a good suspense throughout the film, and it combines that well with the action in the film, I will say. So I think it accomplishes, for the most part, what it was trying to do. There's definitely just some times where I'm like, okay, we have to accept that that's what the character would do there, or that's the specific convenience that wound up arising in the situation. So there's a little bit of that, but it is an action film. You probably expect some of that going into it. Special effects, I think, were pretty strong. There were scenes where people are getting shot and things like that. So it felt like, for the most part, they captured some of those things effectively, just because, you know, it's an action film. You're expecting there to be chaos and guns flying and people running around on just everything going crazy.
It feels like you're running at an incredible rate, Harry.
So I think it does a good job where it's used. They don't need to do a lot of it. When it's done effectively. And then the music and sound effects and things like that, I think they did a pretty good job. I think for the most part, the music that was used throughout the film was like Christmas songs. So it definitely did that Die Hard thing where you have Christmas music putting you into the Christmas mood. So I think this could be one of those movies in the future where it's like, is that a Christmas movie? I don't know. It definitely, I don't want to keep comparing it to Die Hard, but it feels like it has that same situation where it's an action film taking place at Christmas and there's Christmas themes around it as well. And then finally, the fun factor. I will say this is probably one that is pretty strong overall. It's not meant to be taken super seriously. If it is, I feel like it doesn't do a good job of that, but it definitely is. It's there for a fun, good time where you're just seeing what's going to happen and you're just not sure what's going to happen next. I feel like the fun factor is pretty strong in this film. And that overall gives me, for a review score, I feel like I gave a lot of positives there. But if I'm being honest, because of the believability factor and because of how I felt about certain characters over others, I'm going to give this one a review score of a 5 out of 10. So for my review scoring, that's an average film. I don't view like 7 as average or like things like that, like a lot of modern day media does. 5 is average for me. Anything 6 and above is above average, and obviously 4 and below is below average. So this is a very average film overall, so I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. Now with that, we're going to now jump into spoilers. So FYI, if you haven't seen the film and you don't want to be spoiled, this is the time for that to be part of the discussion here. So as mentioned, you start off with Ethan, who's our main protagonist, who's a TSA officer, and you can tell he has some higher aspirations for what he wants to do with his life. He wants to be a police officer. He's in a relationship with his girlfriend, who's pregnant also, Nora, and she also works at the airport. So that helps kind of have her involved in the story here as well, just because they're at the same location where all the drama is taking place. And she's really pushing him to try to pursue his dreams a little bit more. And he pushes to try to get a promotion at work and is essentially put on the test run of running the x-ray machine with TSA. And in doing so, you're kind of messing up the villain's plans. So prior to the protagonist being introduced, we do have the villain in a quick scene where he's doing a deal with somebody else and he winds up taking out the guy that he's dealing with, and he takes like the money and the stuff with him. So definitely gives a good backdrop to who this villain is. As I said, though, it's kind of like you're seeing the back of his head. It's Jason Bateman. You're seeing the back of his head. You're seeing him talk. So not a whole lot of visuals of seeing him. It's just pitching this as a, dark, evil character. Maybe they wanted to do that because obviously Jason Bateman's in a lot of comedies. Maybe they're easing into him being the villain. It's just having his voice sounding intimidating and not necessarily seeing his face until we've established him as a intimidating threat later on in the movie. So we have that takes place prior to the protagonist seeing his girlfriend. After that, we have, as mentioned, he winds up running the TSA line, and we see the villains who are thrown off by this. They planned on somebody else being at the line at that point in time. So at that point, they have to do a little bit of a pivot, and they wind up giving this earpiece to Ethan, our protagonist, and you have Jason Bateman talking him in the ear and essentially running him through the plan, saying, hey, this guy named Mateo with this red hat's going to come through, and you need to let him through and not grab his suitcase, and essentially just let him through. And there's a few times throughout that where Ethan's trying to challenge that a bit, and he's like, who is this? And obviously he thinks it's a joke at first, and then we're kind of slowly learning that the villain has their stuff together. Like, they can see him at all angles. He tries to sneak some calls here and there and give some hand signs. I think he gives the finger at one point, and Jason Bateman's like, your boss isn't going to like that very much. And then we see like he's doing that at that point. So it's very clear that the villains have their stuff together. They're in control of the situation. Every time Ethan tries to kind of sneak away and do something and relay a message, it gets shut down quickly. So great job at building suspense and pitching these characters and these villains as very intimidating threats who are not going to be kind of toyed with, essentially. A few of those times where he tries to sneak things around, he tries to do, I think it's like invisible writing at one point. He puts on a boarding pass. Then you have his coworker take that away. And eventually you see the guy falls down. He has like a heart attack. So every time Ethan tries to relay a message out to somebody, something negative happens and he realizes he's kind of trapped in the situation. After that takes place, you have Ethan step away from the TSA line, and ultimately his coworker gets put back in his spot. So at that point, he's no longer running the line, and Jason Bateman's like, no, you need to get back over there and run the line. I don't care how you do it. So Ethan goes to like grab coffee from the break room. It felt like we knew what was going to happen at this point, but he goes to try to grab coffee. Somebody tries to see him doing this, but he like sneaks it behind his back. It felt like that was super obvious he had that there. But he has 2 bottles of alcohol that he pours in the coffee. He goes back to the TSA line and has the coffee swapped with the one that his friend working the line had. And you have Jason Bateman go and tell Hank from Breaking Bad, hey, I think there's a TSA agent who's been drinking. He goes over, sees the guy has alcohol in his coffee, and gets fired pretty much right on the spot there. Then we have Ethan come back and take over that role at running the line. Then separately, you have this detective, Elena Cole, who's investigating this arson case. I believe it's the one from the beginning of the movie, where they see that the Novichok, I think is what they call it. It's pretty much this gas agent that can kill you, and sees that it's been taken. She winds up intercepting one of those calls that Ethan attempted to call the police and realizes, okay, there's a threat with TSA at the airport. Let's get everyone shut down. So they go shut down that part of the airport, and Jason Bateman and his colleague, who's like in this white van outside with a sniper rifle and somebody captured, they're trying to pivot from here, saying, how are we going to figure this out? When that wing of the airport gets shut down, there is a group meeting of the TSA agents, and they're like deciding what to do. You have Ethan signing with his boss's credentials, and he puts Mateo, the guy he was supposed to let through the line, on this list of people to pretty much grab and go through their stuff. So he does this in a separate room that's in like high security area. So Jason Bateman doesn't have eyes in this room, so he's not aware of what just took place here. After they get out of there, Ethan and Jason Bateman actually interact in the bathroom. They do this a couple of times throughout the movie. Wind up having a little bit of rift, and Ethan actually grabs the gun of, I believe his name's technically the Traveler, but Jason Bateman in the bathroom. And Jason Bateman's like, hey, this bomb's about to blow up in 10 minutes if you don't do something about it. And he winds up having Ethan go to where his boss and Mateo are. His boss is like going through Mateo's briefcase, and he's about to like figure out what's going on here. And obviously there's a bomb in the briefcase, so it's not going to look good for Mateo in there. And Ethan runs in there, has a gun, and Jason Bateman tells him to shoot him. Doesn't wind up doing that, but we have Mateo grab a pen on the table, stab him in the neck with that, and pretty much Hank from Breaking Bad. It's now dead on the floor at this point, and he's out of the picture. And you have Mateo and Ethan kind of go back and forth with each other. Here's a cool realization that we have here, and it reminds me a little bit of a Black Mirror episode where there's like people just relaying jobs because they have to do these jobs. But Mateo, we find out, similar to Ethan, is also forced to do this horrible act because he's kind of held against his will, and his husband is in danger if he doesn't follow through with the plan. So both of these characters are now forced to proceed as required, otherwise they're going to lose a loved one. Cool realization there that, hey, there's other people that are now part of this game as well. It's not just you in this. So we have Ethan and Mateo in this room, and this is a bit of a stretch to believe because it's kind of a prerequisite for what happens later in the movie, but we have Jason Bateman in the earpiece talking to Ethan, telling him how to disarm the bomb, does all these multiple steps. Somehow he's getting to that point. His colleague is at the door trying to get in, and just with 2 seconds left, he winds up disarming the bomb. And then the colleague comes in and he's like, what's going on here? He's like, I'm just, going through the stuff as I was supposed to. And the guy's like, I don't really know what's going on with you. You're being a little bit strange. I don't think you're supposed to be doing this. And he was also suspicious of him earlier when his colleague got fired. So this coworker of his is constantly like questioning what's going on, but doesn't really amount to anything in the future. So just kind of an extra piece to the movie. They're then instructed to get rid of the body of the boss who got stabbed in the neck with a pen. They go to do that in the baggage area. And during that time, Mateo is being told in his ear, you need to kill Ethan. So he shoots at him a bunch of times. I think he may hit him at one point. It's hard to tell. But they're just constantly running. And eventually Mateo shoots, and the gun like blows up or like shoots back and kills Mateo. It was like a plastic gun, so I don't know if that was kind of destined to explode on final shot, and that's what happened. But either way, Mateo gets killed there, kind of by his own doing. You then have Ethan grab Mateo's phone and try to reach out to one of his other coworkers, who's supposed to go over to Nora and just let her know what's happening. Separately, back to the side plot with the detective. She's driving to the airport with this other person in the car who's driving it, and she finds out during that car ride that, hey, this person driving the car is actually not who they say they are. She points the gun at him, and he's like, what are you going to do? I'm driving at like 70 on the highway. We're all going to die if you do this. They wind up having kind of a cool scene where he's like driving back and forth, trying to crash into cars to try to get the gun out of her hand. Gun goes flying. They wind up flying around a bit and start fighting. Car flips over eventually. Somehow they're both more or less okay. Car's upside down. They're both still seatbelted in upside down. He gets his hands and he grabs the detective's throat, and he's like trying to strangle her out. And she's struggling for quite a bit of time. It feels like they're trying to build suspense, being like, oh, she's definitely going to get smoked here. And she's getting strangled, and secretly with one of her hands, she has the gun somehow and shoots him, and he dies. So she gets out of the car perfectly fine somehow. She grabs the gun. There's somebody driving by who just stops. She winds up taking their car and driving to the airport herself. We then come back to the Traveler, or Jason Bateman, who's hunting down Ethan at this point in the baggage area. has a gun, shoots at him again. I can't tell if he hit him with that one too. I feel like Ethan gets nicked by like tons of bullets throughout this movie, but keeps going. He's definitely the diehard protagonist hero, and he's way farther down than Jason Bateman is. Sees another bag, and we're not really positive what he does here, but it's pretty obvious for the most part. He winds up putting the bow in that bag and presumably puts the bomb in that other bag because the bomb has a tracker on it, and Jason Bateman goes up to it and is content with that being the bag he's supposed to be looking for. So takes that and essentially leaves Ethan to his own devices. We then have Jason Bateman tell his partner who's out in the van, kill Nora, Ethan's girlfriend. He goes into the airport, and then I got tipped off earlier by Ethan. He's like, hey, Nora, you run. I'll take care of this guy. He's like approaching the guy. Guy stabs him and just keeps going after Nora. Nobody decides to stop this guy, so he just keeps going. I'm not positive either how somehow Ethan knew the exact vehicle that the guy was driving. I know at one point there was like a sniper on him, but I may have missed something. But I feel like he knew the exact vehicle he was driving. He's like, it's a white vehicle. It's got this on the side of it. So maybe he could see it from when that sniper situation was happening. But either way, he's able to identify that vehicle early when he's telling Nora to like look out for that. And that's how they know this guy's coming for you. So he winds up chasing Nora through the parking garage. Nobody's concerned about stopping this guy at all. Nobody's actually in the parking garage either. It's just like completely dead, which I don't really believe. I feel like LAX, that place would be slam packed. But she's like hiding behind cars. She winds up making a noise with the bottle at one point, which I don't know how she gets around the car this fast, but he looks to the other side of the car, seeing where the bottle noise was. She runs around the other side, whacks him in the head with the bottle. He doesn't fall down or anything, so I'm not really sure why he doesn't still shoot at her. That's kind of a theme with this movie a lot, where the villains have clear opportunities to shoot at somebody and they choose not to. But he chases after her, and she winds up running into the arms of Ethan. They kind of spin around, and we see a gunshot happen. And it makes us believe this guy just shot Ethan in the back. But turns out the guy who was in the van, the husband of Mateo, kind of got broken free a little bit when the guy was driving a little recklessly, kind of damaged the side of the vehicle. So he got a little bit set free, and he grabbed the sniper rifle from the van and shot at the guy who was hunting Nora. So one of the bad guys is dead at this point, and then you have Ethan and Nora talk to the guy in the van. I think his name was Jesse. He tips off, hey, there's 2 tickets they bought, so they're going to wind up going on that flight to DC instead of the one in New York, because I think the wing where they're going to New York was shut down, but the wing where they were flying to DC was not shut down. We then get a little bit of backstory for the villains here. I don't know the entire details of the situation, but it sounded like there was a congresswoman who was on this flight to DC, and she had a bill that was out there, and pretty much the defense contractors like didn't want her situation to move forward, so they wanted to take her out. And if they take her out on this plane, then it looks like an attack by like the Russians, I think was the goal. That kind of explains why you wouldn't just shoot the congresswoman, but it felt like there's probably an easier way to do it than having this big drawn out thing. I'm also not positive why earlier in the movie Jason Bateman really cared about defusing the bomb. Maybe because he was in the airport still, but if it was supposed to be a big explosion that destroyed the entire airport, it felt like the congresswoman would have been included in that. But I don't know, maybe he didn't think he could get away from the airport fast enough, or maybe he thought, hey, there's a risk that she doesn't get taken out with this. And doing it on an airplane is more of a clear-cut confirmation that it takes place. But either way, he winds up being happy the bomb got defused earlier. Then we have Jason Bateman with the suitcase, and he's just at like the bar, and woman comes and swaps backpacks with him. We find out, hey, there's a parachute in this one backpack. So his intent is to blow up the plane and get off the plane before that takes place. So he's definitely trying to survive still in the situation here. We then have him boarding the plane. They're supposed to be shutting down the entire airport. The detective winds up running into Ethan at one point, and he like kicks her gun away and then gives the description of what the villain looks like with like the hat and the black outfit he's wearing. She's trying to target that person in the airport, but it turns out he's on the plane already. So he's already bypassed that step. He's putting the bag in the upper luggage area, and it's not fitting in there. And instead of trying something different, he's just continuing to try to jam it up in there. And turns out the flight attendant walks by, and of course, the sticker that's like clearly facing towards your shows, hey, this bag's supposed to be in the cargo area. It's supposed to be checked at this point. And he's like, no, it's supposed to be here. And he realizes, oh, Ethan switched bags earlier because it would be too big. And then if it was too big, it had to go in the cargo. I don't know how Ethan had this plan already, but either way, he wanted the bag to go in the cargo so he could do this rescue plan later on, I guess. So I feel like eventually Jason Bateman's like, if the bag's underneath or if it's with me, it doesn't really matter. It's on the plane. So he's like, yeah, take it. Go ahead. She takes it underneath. We have Nora go up to the detective, and The detective is trying to ground the flight or slow things down because she doesn't want this plane taking off and pretty much exploding in midair. And I don't really know why she believes him here, but she winds up saying, yeah, I'll trust you, Nora, and I'll trust you, Ethan. I will let this plane take off and just hope your plan works. I don't feel like that probably would have happened. I feel like she would have been, no, we need to keep them grounded and we're not going to just give up plans just because you have a hunch that you could probably resolve this another way. But she winds up doing that. Have Ethan, who's like riding this baggage carousel out to the plane, somehow sneaks into the cargo of the plane. Plane takes off. You have Jason Bateman, who's pretty much like, oh, I'm good to go now. And he's looking at his phone, and we have Ethan down in there. He's able to find the luggage and find the bomb. He's in there taking it and defusing it, similar to what he did earlier in the movie because he learned how to do it and just happened to remember exactly how to do it. Then we have Jason Bateman see this on his phone. So he goes to the back of the plane and goes down into the cargo area. I don't know how nobody stopped him from doing this, but he was just permitted, hey, go in the cargo area. He has a gun on him too, winds up shooting Ethan in the leg. Of course, he hits him in the leg and not like somewhere where it's going to be more fatal. And we have Ethan just laying there in the back of the plane. We hear the pilot say, hey, we need to turn this thing around and land this. They tell the passengers, hey, we're going to go back to LAX. We're going to land this plane. We have Jason Bateman with a gun and says, hey, the plane's going to blow up anyway. I don't need to worry about you anymore, Ethan. Here's the part where I feel like they didn't really land the plane, if you will, where it feels like the climax of the movie, you have to not have anything really flimsy at that point because that's really what the movie rests on. But he chooses to not shoot Ethan. He's pitched as being this hardcore killer throughout the entire movie, and he doesn't shoot Ethan to kill him. He leaves him there, and he's going to open up the bomb to reset it and realizes, oh, one of the chemical slots is no longer in the bomb. Ethan has it in his hand. He grabbed it, winds up shoving Jason Bateman into this compartment, and winds up throwing the chemical on the ground and breaking the thing, closing the door, pretty much leaving Jason Bateman in there to die from breathing in the toxic air of the chemicals. Feels a little messed up, but that's what he winds up doing. I don't know how he thought that was going to be effective too, because I would have been a little bit unsure about throwing a chemical on the ground and seeing what the reaction is going to be, because even if it's just a gas, that could probably leak through once they open the door at some point. I also am not sure how I would have thought maybe this won't explode, because obviously it was part of a bomb. I'd be afraid of just throwing something on the ground and seeing what happens, but he winds up doing that. Jason Bateman's locked in there. You see him like bloody, trying to like really get out, and Ethan just has the door blocked and leaving him in there. Plane lands. He comes out of the cargo area, and the cops are all like, hands up. He comes out there. He's got like a cuff on his hand. He's got shot in the leg. And the detective's like, oh, leave him. He's fine. Send him to the medical folks. And they wind up treating him. And he's like, oh, yeah, I took care of the bomb and took care of the villain. We don't really see Jason Bateman ever again. It's presumed he obviously just died in that chemical room that he was locked in. And she's like, oh, just get the hazmat suits in there. Take care of it. Get the folks out of here. I guess nobody else was affected by the chemicals. We then see the congresswoman get taken off the plane as well. So she has survived as well. So it seems like the plan of the villains has been foiled in many different ways at this point. From there, we just have the detective make some comment like, hey, call me when you get stitched up. Then we fast forward to a final scene where he's at the airport again, has a kid, and he's just going through the airport as a passenger at this point. He waves to the guy that was suspicious of him the entire movie. We end with somewhat of a cheesy scene. He realizes, oh, I have this on me. I need to throw this in the bin because it's going to set the detectors off. He throws in his LAPD badge. Seems like he's made himself as a police officer at this point. So definitely a heartfelt ending. It felt like very obvious throughout the movie that they were setting this up for the hero to be successful. But I think some of the challenges I had was I didn't really like the hero as much as I liked the villain. I feel like Jason Bateman was more fun. I get you don't want to have like the bad guys win. That's not really a heartfelt movie necessarily to have, especially for a Christmas movie. But they could have done something better where we liked the main character more or we liked the villain less. I don't know. It felt like there's definitely parts where I feel like I wanted the bad guys to be more successful. And there's a lot of loopholes. Like you had him just happen to move it to the larger bag where like, oh, this one's definitely going to be put in the cargo. I'm going to go in there later. So it's just a lot of conveniences. And I get it's a silly action movie, so it shouldn't be taken super seriously. But as far as enjoying it myself, I feel like I got some enjoyment out of it. I feel like the premise, though, promised a lot more than I wound up getting. The first 20 or so minutes definitely made it seem like it'd be a cool, suspenseful thriller movie. I somewhat did that, but it got a little bit schlocky and actiony and a little bit silly and goofy here and there. You definitely had people die throughout, so there was some risk with it, but I kind of knew as I was watching the whole movie, Nora and Ethan, neither of them are going to die because that's just the type of movie it felt like this was going to wind up being once we got developed more into the plot there. So overall, not bad. If you're a fan of things like Die Hard, I definitely say check it out. Or if you want to watch a new Christmassy type movie, an action film, something different that you haven't seen, I would say check it out. As far as my own preference for the film, I'm going to say, as I said, this was an average film, 5 out of 10 for me. But what are your guys' thoughts? Have you seen this film? Have you seen it advertised to you and you're debating seeing it? Would love to see your feedback down below on this film as a whole. Do you think it's close to Die Hard? I know Die Hard's really upper echelon for a lot of people when it comes to action movies, Christmas movies, whatever you want to call it. But where do you place this one? Do you think this compares to that, or do you think it's a little bit inferior in your thoughts? So we'll love to see your comments there too. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.